Well, welcome. We're here to talk about how to make your compliance training program more effective using real-time compliance and policy adoption strategies and tools. So it's a really important topic for a couple of reasons. We have on the call, it looks like we have people that come from what looks like more of a technology background, as well as people that come from a compliance or a risk or an HR background. And that's a good thing. The topic of compliance is one that is getting more and more complicated. That's what we're seeing across all industries. We deal with customers from lots of different verticals, both in the United States and out of it. And what we're seeing repeatedly is that the burden of regulation and compliance is getting heavier and heavier. The complexity is growing and growing. And as a result, it's getting more and more difficult for organizations to enable their employees to do the right thing, to make the decision that offers the least risk or that is most compliant with their policies. But it's really important to do that. Those of you that are from a compliance background will already understand why that's important. Those of you that are not, we're going to talk a little bit about that. So first of all, this is a quote from a 2016 Ethics and Compliance Training Report, a benchmark report. They said that only 12% of organizations currently have an advanced compliance training program. About 40% would rate their programs as only basic or reactive. Kind of makes you wonder where the other 48% in this scenario, right? But let's set that aside for the moment. Let's think that only 12% have an advanced program at the moment, and almost half would call it basic or reactive. So what does basic or reactive mean to you? Well, I'm not a compliance expert myself. I'm a training and adoption expert. And I know when I hear something about a training program being basic or reactive, I think of one that is not terribly effective because it's based on old, more traditional training models that just have been found to just not be very effective anymore when you're dealing with large numbers of users. And compliance issues frequently do affect large numbers of large numbers of employees across your organization, probably all of them, or most of them anyway. So how do you go about making your training program for compliance purposes more than just basic or reactive? Well, first of all, we have to live in truth, right? We have to think about what we have already and ask ourselves how to categorize that. So do any of these sound familiar? Does your compliance team have an intranet site where they just publish up compliance policies that are these big, huge PDF files that takes 10 minutes to scroll through? It's important to have those files because it's an authoritative document, right? But honestly, your employees are not going to go open those files and spend 10 minutes looking through them to find an answer about how long do I need to keep this PDF file. It's not consumable. It's difficult. It's a traditional method of communicating policies, but it's not effective. The second one here is remote refresher courses, those conference calls where you do kind of a roll call, and if this person says they're present, you check them off on the list, and when the call is over, you consider them trained. Doesn't matter if they were paying attention or not. But that's a very common practice that has happened over the years at companies, and compliance training is no exception to that. Third, a little more modern approach on this is using an LMS or a learning management system where you create these e-learning courses that are self-paced, self-serve, and then you schedule people times when they have to go take these courses. Now, that's better, but still that's far removed from the tools that employees are using every day. In fact, in many cases, what I've experienced is the only time people ever go to that LMS system is that once a year when they have to do their refresher training. As a result of that, not only the content gets stale over the course of the year in the LMS, but it gets stale in their minds because they're not seeing this anywhere. It is far removed from where they're doing their work every day. The fourth option here is having those refresher trainings on a yearly cadence, and we just pack all kinds of stuff into that yearly refresher training, so it takes hours to get through. Not effective. Why? Well, for one thing, rarely do people absorb hours of information in one setting. They just don't. Many times it builds up resentment because there's other work they feel like they need to be doing, so they blow through it as quickly as they possibly can. That doesn't exactly help retention. The other thing is that if it's only happening once a year, we're expecting someone to remember all those details, all that complexity for 12 months. And that just doesn't happen very frequently with something that's maybe not their primary focus in their job. A fifth example of an ineffective compliance training program is publishing a whistleblower hotline number. Now, it's not wrong to have one of those numbers, but what I've seen in my experience over the years is that the only time you ever see that number anywhere is when you're going through the refresher training. As a result, it's not very accessible to employees. It's good to have it, but that's just not an effective way to make that available to users, employees. 70-20-10 learning is about a learning model. There was a famous study that was done about adult learning back in the 1980s that found that of all the things that adults learn over their professional lives, only about 10% of that comes from formal classes. About 20% comes from more informal means, things like coaching and mentoring, and 70% they learn just by doing, hands-on, jumping in and learning as they go. So why? I mean, you would think, especially looking at the budgets that have been spent by corporations over the last few decades on training, you would think that was an effective way to do it, right? We set up a class, we get an instructor, or we set up a learning management system, an e-learning site, and we set those things up and we make these great courses for people to go through, and they absorb lots of information and they get smarter and better at making decisions related to compliance. Well, the problem is it doesn't work that way in real life very much. When those classes, whether they're in person or whether they're e-learning, either way, if they're too long, if they're too much information, the employees just don't soak it in. If it happens too infrequently, they can't remember what they did soak in. It's also not very easy for you to track these things to an effective outcome. Like we mentioned the example before of the remote training where people are on a conference call and they say that they're present. Okay? Well, just because they're present doesn't mean that they paid attention through the call, nor does it mean that they understood what was there, nor does it mean that they'll be able to remember what's there afterwards. So it's just not easily trackable. It's not an effective training method for us to rely too much on those formal training methods, things like classes. Now, there's some argument about an LMS, a self-paced electronic learning course, about whether that's formal or informal. We'll say it's somewhere in the middle for our purposes today. But let's compare the idea with a different topic outside of compliance. Let's say it's something that we might have many of you that might have some interest in, maybe cooking. You might be interested in it enough to sign up for a cooking class somewhere along the line and go spend a half a day or a full day, maybe when you're on vacation, learning to make something, to make food in Italy. Wow, what a cool thing that would be, right? Even if you enjoyed it and you understood what was happening, how many of the details in that class do you think you would remember over the next few months if you tried to do the same things at home again? You remember some of it, and it's most likely the things that you used right away. The other things are going to slowly fade in your mind. Some of them will fade very quickly in your mind. Compare that to maybe when you have a question, you want to learn how to do something, and you go find a YouTube video that walks you through how to cook that dish. Probably a little more effective, right? Because it's happening when you're interested in it. It's just this one topic, this one dish that you want to learn how to make instead of a full day of training. You can do it when it's relevant for you. So that's better. But how would that compare to when you're actually making the dish? If you could ask your mom real quick, what's the difference? Right? What's the difference between a tablespoon and a teaspoon? Right? If you just get an answer to that, which one of those three methods do you think would be most effective at teaching you that information? Which one are you most likely to understand and remember? The one where you're working on it, right? And you're getting tips along the way, you're getting little pieces of consumable information that help you, and then you immediately apply it. It's a much better learning model. Now, take that comparison again back to the compliance arena. Imagine that we're doing that same kind of thing, but with a subject that you personally find boring. Now, if you come from a compliance background, I'm sorry. Okay? And maybe you probably find those things interesting. Most employees at your company do not. Kind of like they don't find technology very interesting for the most part. It's a necessary evil that they need to understand something about to do their jobs. So if you look at that same comparison, if you go with a more formal end of that, it's just not nearly as effective. Is it possible to take something that is very formal, though, something like compliance, and to make training for it informal? Is that even possible? Doesn't it have to be formal? Does it have to be structured in some way so that you can track it and demonstrate it and make sure that the right things get delivered? Well, structure doesn't mean that it has to be formal. We're really talking about the delivery method and the method by which people consume the information, not necessarily the process of you creating it. There's a difference there. Let's take a look at our next slide here. What we find is that because of all these things we've been talking about, compliance training programs are evolving in many organizations, and it's by necessity. Organizations that used to do a lot of those instructor-led classes or workshops that are based on different compliance-related topics find themselves doing that less and less. There might be a smaller user population where it's really important, or they're really deep into compliance issues where they need that kind of meaty content to really immerse themselves in it. But for most users, it's overkill and it's just not effective. It's actually counterproductive for many of them. So many of them have shifted more toward the middle of this diagram, more toward those e-learning systems where employees can come do them at their own pace, self-serve, and then they can track which employees have completed which courses. So that's a little less formal. We still have the challenge of too much information and too long in between, and too far removed from where people are doing their work. It's not the same as while you're cooking, asking mom, what is the detail on how I do this? So on the far right side of the screen here, what we find is an icon that represents something like a real-time virtual compliance guide. We're not talking about a person here. We're talking about a system that allows you to provide compliance help in line, in real time for your employees while they're working in various systems. Now, why are organizations starting to make this shift over to them? Well, it's because of the growing weight and complexity and consequences for compliance problems. GDPR is something that had many companies very, very concerned the first half of this year. And we heard a lot about it because of its broad scope, because of the high penalties that were part of it, because of all the companies that would be affected by this and how dangerous it could be. Well, just last month in September, GDPR issued its first fine. It was to a Canadian company. It wasn't even in Europe, right? A Canadian company, and their fine was $19.5 million. This one example illustrates the growing trend because before GDPR, from what I've read, the cap was somewhere around 500,000 for similar issues. Now GDPR formalizes that, standardizes things, but also allows for these just incrementally and exponentially larger fines. So it becomes a much bigger deal. I am not a compliance expert, so I won't try and talk about GDPR specifically. What I am an expert on is training and adoption strategies and how they affect a training program for compliance. However, the news is full of stories like this. Here's another one that's right now going on. Read this week that Facebook is potentially facing fines of up to $1.6 billion for privacy violations related to GDPR. Hasn't been determined what the final amount is there, but that's potentially what it could be. That's a game changer, right? Similarly, sometimes it's not just expensive for organizations. Sometimes it's for individuals too. Many of the modern laws and regulations allow regulatory agencies to go after individuals in the company, whether they're individuals that did something wrong or individuals in leadership positions. Like Volkswagen, for instance. You remember Dieselgate happened? Well, the compliance officer for the U.S. Volkswagen Corporation, I don't remember the exact name of the entity there, but that's a description. But that compliance officer was personally given a fine of $400,000 and 7 years in prison for the company's violations at that point. So it's a big deal. It matters. And training is not, obviously it's not the only thing related to a compliance program. There's many other things, controls that need to be in place, policies that need to be written, expertise in the regulatory environment. All that stuff is important. But training is an essential part of it. If you want to avoid problems like this in your company, or even for you as an individual, you have to make sure that you're communicating compliance information to the users in a way that they can consume, understand, and apply in real life. Now, the Department of Justice offers some guidance for the effectiveness of training. This is a couple of questions that come from one of their guidance documents. And it asks, has the training that's been offered in the form and language appropriate for the intended audience? So think there about the spirit of what it's asking there. Is the training appropriate for the audience? Is it giving it to the right people in the right place in the right way for them to be able to apply it? That's essentially what it's asking. The second question there is, how has the company measured the effectiveness of their training? Gets back to the, is it just attending or is it actually viewing information? What is it that you're tracking in those cases? So those are important questions. An effective training program has to be thinking about questions like that to make sure that they can demonstrate that the organization has taken all the reasonable efforts it can to enable compliance, to empower their employees to make the right decisions. But that's only one of the purposes for a compliance training program. Demonstrating that your organization has done all they can is one of those reasons. The other reason is to actually help your employees make better decisions, to make sure that they understand your policies, and they not only understand what the concept is, but understand how to apply it specifically when they're working in various applications, various platforms. So two reasons there that are really very different from one another. And many of the current compliance training programs that are out there are really focused on the first one. They're really just focused on demonstrating that we have a training program for compliance, that we've required all of our employees to take this and that they have done so with a 97 or 98% completion rate. That's not the same thing as helping your employees be compliant. So question yourself, in your organization, how effective is your organization's compliance training program? How effective is it? How much does it actually help your employees to do the right thing? How confident are you that you're doing everything you can to ensure that your employees can make those right decisions every day when they're working? So your answer matters here a lot. But it raises the question, what does a more modern, effective training program look like? Well, we had these three icons in our presentation earlier. We talked about the old school, traditional instructor-led things where people would go and attend a class somewhere. We take that through the self-paced online learning tools, and then eventually over to the virtual compliance guide on the right. Well, a more effective modern training program leans more to the right side of this diagram than to the left. Thus the frowny and the smiley face here. See, the answer is not right or wrong, one or the other. The answer is, where do you be to be most effective? And really, you want to swing more toward the right end because it matches the way people learn and the way people work and the way people retain that information. And it helps them to take that last mile from knowing the policy to being able to put it into practice. Much more than those methods that are more toward the left in the diagram. So what's that look like? Well, we broke it down into 5 different areas here. The first is that, what is a virtual guide? Well, it's kind of a compliance trail guide, right? It's a consistent user experience that follows users around from tool to tool and makes it easy for them to find help. It becomes almost a subliminal or a subconscious thing. This tool becomes so ubiquitous that they don't have to think about where to find something. They know that this help tab for their compliance guide is always around. It's always there that they can quickly look up an answer when they're uncertain of what to do. Real-time is similar to that same idea. Real-time here means that it's available in the tool where they're working. They don't have to stop what they're doing, say in webmail or in Documentum or in PeopleSoft or whatever other platform. They don't have to stop what they're working, go open up another browser window and find a compliance team's publishing site and go look up a policy and search through it to find an answer. Realistically, people don't do that very often because it's hard, it's painful. So instead of doing that, you offer them real-time help. That means the help is available at the point of need while they're working in whatever system they're in, instead of trapping it in a publishing site or in an annual training exercise, and that's the only place they can be found. The third icon here represents real-life benefits. Those long PDF policies that are important, they're authoritative, they're necessary. They are broken down into what we might call snackable chunks. They're easily consumed. They are help items that give you one answer to one question at a time. And they're also based on relevant real-world scenarios that apply to the tool the user happens to be in. For an example, someone's in webmail and it tells them, what's the criteria for understanding if this email can be deleted or not? Or how do I know if I can send this information to an external user? Those are real-life compliance questions that would occur to someone when they're in the webmail product. Thus, it's important to be able to deliver those real-life kind of answers to them, rather than just theoretical, conceptual things that they then have to try and interpret themselves. What are the guidelines? How do they know? That's what you want to tell them, real-life answers. Now, the fourth one here is easy management. The compliance team needs to make their life easier as well. They need to have a central place where they can manage all this compliance guidance information, all these help items. They can create them, they can manage them, they can assign them so they show up in these different applications and at the right place at the right time, and they can do it all centrally and easily without being a developer. That's important because you want the people that have the compliance know-how to be able to translate their expertise into something that helps. You don't want to have to go through an abstraction layer, bringing in your IT department or a development team to go and do those things. Cutting out that middleman makes the content more valuable, more accurate, and much quicker to produce. The last element here is remindable. It is important for this type of a system to be able to have date triggers. For instance, you may have an annual certification that people need to do. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to remind them of that real time when they open a platform to work in it, rather than just rely on them seeing the message that you sent to email and is now in their junk mail folder? Right? Push notifications in cross applications in your organization. Another example would be a policy change, perhaps. Maybe you did the annual trainings back in May, and you have all these help items to help people understand them in the meantime. But in September or October, you have to make a change to one of those policies due to a legal issue or a change in the environment. Well, how do you communicate that? Again, do you go back to email where you may or may not get people's attention? Or do you give them a push notification while they're working in the applications that are affected by that change? Much more effective, right? Or scheduled reminders. Maybe, for instance, every time somebody goes to a certain repository, you want them to know that they cannot store patient information or PII information there. Those types of things are important in this type of system as well. So let's dig into them a little bit. Here's an example of how VisualSP goes about answering these things. You'll notice in the screenshot on the right, you can see that there's a collaboration site open in the background, a place where people are storing and sharing documents with each other. And you'll notice on the right, we have a help panel that just slides over from the right side of the browser window. We'll do a demo here in a few moments so you can see actually what this looks like, but I want you to focus on how these features map to those needs that you have in a compliance program. Notice that we have a nice panel that groups things by topical areas, and we have different formats to information that can show up here as well. But it's a nice consistent thing. It's real time in the fact that it shows up right here in the tool where people are likely to need to know this information to understand where can patient information go, for instance, because of HIPAA regulations. It's also real life. You'll notice that we have specific answers here about specific questions that match use cases of the tool where we're working. So it's a guide that's consistent. It's a user experience that people don't have to keep thinking about and learning. It's the same in every tool. It's real time. It follows them from tool to tool so that they can get help when and where they need it. And it's real life. It's focused on what they need. Another option here, another valuable piece of this system is the easy management. If you're in the compliance team, you need to be able to easily communicate your know-how, your expertise in a way that your users can grasp it. You don't want to have to go through and develop something or build something complicated to do that. You want it to be simple and easy. Easy for you to do and easy for them to consume. So this is what the interface looks like for you to create a compliance help item. You have a green Add Help Item button that exists in the panel. It gives you a form here in the browser. There's no extra software to download and install. There's no coding necessary. It's a form that you fill out. Drop-down lists, blanks to fill out, that sort of thing, so that you can create the item that you're looking for. Related to this same idea of management is the idea of analytics, being able to track what's happening with your help items. The screenshot that we're showing here shows you something that's really common in a compliance scenario where I need to look at a certain user and demonstrate what help items has he looked at. Say you have a compliance problem, this is a good way for you to tell, has he accessed the help that's made available to him or not? Or maybe before that, hopefully before that, you're trying to look and see how active these users are in areas where it's important for their team to be knowledgeable. You can also break down analytics in other ways in the tool based on the help item itself. How many users have looked at this one? And who are they? We can also look at it by application scope. How is our traffic for our help items going across different applications in our environment? Again, these can help you make good decisions about what other things to do with your help items, but also so that you can demonstrate afterwards what you've done and how active and effective those things have been. The remindable feature of VisualSP is the idea of having these auto-load items. It's essentially a push notification that you can schedule for employees. As an example, we mentioned the idea of recertification dates or policy changes, but let's talk about the last one here, the regular reminders. Let's say that we have a cloud document repository that we use for some of our basic team collaboration needs. But the company policy says that patient information can never go there because of HIPAA regulations. Okay? Well, the auto load functionality would allow you to be able to change the navigation links in your tool so that every time somebody goes to that location, it automatically pops up a help item that reminds them they cannot put HIPAA information in this location. Very useful, very effective way to make sure that people don't lose sight of where they are and what's appropriate there. So VisualSP is an expert in this sort of thing. As I mentioned, I've been an expert in things like training and adoption strategies for quite a few years. And what it amounts to is many of the challenges that you face in a compliance training program are the same challenges that many technology departments have faced for quite some time. There's a movement in the industry right now. There are several tools that are coming to fruition at the moment that do this type of thing for technology applications to try and make software more usable by providing help within it. However, VisualSP is really taking a focus on the compliance use cases, and as a result, the feature set here and the expertise we can bring by creating these small, very consumable help items for complex topics can be a real advantage for you. Here's some examples of people that recognize the leadership that VisualSP offers in this area. Susan Hanley is a conference speaker and adoption expert that has really built out quite a practice by helping IT organizations to understand the business perspective, to help them make things that are adoptable, to help them make sure that they're doing things in a way that the business can actually use and absorb and consume and retain. So notice what she says about VisualSP. It delivers just the right amount of training just when you need it, just when you need to learn something. And that means you're much more likely to retain it. And even if you don't, it's easy for you to find again. Next time you do the task, it's right there for you in context. Another testimonial that we get here is from one of our clients. We have a client organization, TSYS, that is from the electronic payments industry. That's a very heavily regulated industry, as you probably know. And notice that they said that VisualSP is so valuable. Why? Because it knows who the user is, it knows what kind of access they have, it knows where they're working, so it can deliver specific instructions to them. They also have been able to customize the system to start delivering their policy information for all these things we've been talking about today, because it's so valuable. It's such a valuable method of delivering that information. It's consumable, it's consistent, and it's effective. Now let's take a look at how the tool works, VisualSP. Just take a quick tour through the product. So here's a browser that's showing us at the moment a webmail. This is Outlook webmail. At the moment, it's a dummy mailbox. Notice I have a totally fictional contract in here. But let's say as a user, I'm trying to decide, what do I need to do with this? How does that work? Well, over here we have this tab that is consistent. As I work from platform to platform in my company, this tab displays, and I know I can click on it to get information that helps me know what is the right thing to do here. How do I apply our company's policies? So notice I have a section up here about email specifically. It knows that I'm in email, so it shows me that. And if I click on that item, it opens it up and it explains to me that email can be considered a business record and what that means here within AdventureWorks as a company. Notice that we also, in this case, in this particular policy, means that contracts or other records are many times part of a project, and there's an official repository for those where they should be saved. Email inbox is not enough. Well, where is that? There's even a button here that if I click it, will take me to a project repository for that. So a really powerful way for you to deliver this real-life information in real time while people are working in their application. Notice that we also get some items here that are applicable across many platforms. So we could create things, for instance, that define what is PII information, because that would come up over and over again in different platforms. So that's done here. But if I go to another platform here outside of my webmail, if I go to a document repository, this is a SharePoint site, notice that I have over here a different selection of help items. Notice that I still have those three common ones. If I come down here, though, this time I have a HIPAA warning available. I have one here about PII information as well. So it is able to see where I am working. It's also able to see in this particular platform what permission level I have and thus what use cases are necessary for me. The HIPAA warning, notice, is similar to what we just talked about before. It's a warning that patient information, any files containing patient information, cannot be stored here. It even allows us to create a button to redirect people to where they should be storing that type of information. Or in your case, it may not be taking them to a platform, it may be taking them to a more detailed policy document. As we mentioned, and as we've kind of seen with these two examples, this tool can follow you from platform to platform. These two are Microsoft tools, but those are just samples for us to look at. If you notice, we also have the same tool available on our public website. Really, it's available on almost any web platform. You'll notice the tab shows up over here. It's a consistent user experience. It looks and feels the same way. But here I find items that are relevant to this particular website that I'm in. They have nothing to do with webmail or document sharing or any of those things. So you notice you get a lot of flexibility here. As the owner of the platform and the compliance team, as the ones that are creating the content, you have choices about when I'm creating a help item, where does it show up? Does it show up for all platforms, for a subset of platforms? Does it show up for just one particular location, one specific URL it can show up for? You have a lot of flexibility about how broadly this item is relevant. And that allows you to target the information so that it's useful and easy for users. They don't have to think, they don't have to do a lot of searching. The answers are right here. Now, as the owner for something, you might want to see how the editing works. Notice that I have up here as an administrator or as an editor, I have a button where I can enable the edit mode. There's my ability to add an item, or I can choose to edit any of these existing ones. So for instance, if I wanted to edit the item here about PII information, I just come down and click on the pencil icon, and the editor opens up. It shows me what kind of item it is, how it's configured to work. You'll notice here is all the content that I put inside it previously. If I wanted to change something, like if I wanted this to be a little more prominent, maybe I select the text, and let's do font color red. How about that? Okay. Down below, we have options such as which category heading in that accordion menu does it show up under. No coding necessary for this. I can specify if I have multiple items, what order they're in, which sequence this is. Here's the auto load feature we mentioned before, where you have the ability to say, this should open automatically the first time someone visits here. We have the ability to open things in a new window if we don't want to take people away from where they are, or to use the dialogue functionality. Lots of ways that we can control how this is working. Once you're done, you have the ability to save it. You'll notice the tab reloads in the background. We get the visual confirmation that it's done. And immediately, if I go in here, it was the PII information, right? It's this item. You'll notice that my change has taken effect. Very easy to do. You do not need a lot of technical skills or background to do this sort of thing. What you need is subject matter experts that know your compliance policies and know what the common questions are and what the answers are for those questions. And you no doubt have that already on your team. Notice that we have a link down here as well where we can view the entire gallery of help items. So if I click on that link, this is useful both for the admins that might want to go and analyze what we have in bulk. It's also helpful for people that just want to learn a little bit more. Maybe they don't want to go into a particular tool to find out what is the answer for something. So they can come in here and they can look across all of the compliance items or all the help items that are available. And we even have a search blank up here. So if I wanted to talk about PII, I could type it in and it finds things for me, all the different items that have PII within them, within the title or within the description or the body of the help item. Nice, quick, easy way for you to look things up and find them. Since I'm an editor, I can also choose to edit most types of items from here. We have tools at the bottom if you're an editor to be able to export things in bulk, import them in bulk, or delete them in bulk too if that becomes necessary. The useful management or reference tools. All right, let's switch back to our presentation. That's a quick demo from both the end user perspective and the compliance owner perspective. Helps you to see how this type of a platform can really transform your compliance training program. It may or may not be a replacement for what you have currently in your LMS systems, but even if you decide to keep your LMS systems for various reasons and processes that you work in your company, the added value you get by being able to deliver real-life answers in real time while someone's working in a platform is really incomparable. So if you would like to get more information, here are some stats that will help you with that. You'll notice our website is here. We also have my LinkedIn information. You can contact us. We would encourage you as well to take a look at our website. We'll have a follow-up email that comes after this webinar that offers you some artifacts that you can download. For instance, a more detailed white paper about this topic. It gives you a little more detail, a little deeper dive than what we were able to do here in the presentation. So thank you for your time, and we would love to talk to you soon.